Welcome to the deep dive. We've gathered quite a stack of reports here, all focused on public safety in Portland,
hmm
Oregon. We've got the PPB's annual report, some really detailed analyses of regional hazards, too. Our goal today, it's kind of looking at two sides of the same coin. How is the city tackling the crime you see day to day, using data, these targeted missions? And also, how are they prepping for those huge, maybe catastrophic risks that feel distant but are definitely out there? Things like the Cascadia earthquake or potential chemical disasters.
Exactly. It's this tension, right? Between the immediate stuff crime that everyone feels and these predictable, potentially existential threats like earthquakes or massive spills that don't happen often but could be devastating. We're trying to see how they balance those.
Okay, let's dive in then. Starting with the immediate fight, Police Chief Robert Day laid out three main goals for 2024: changing police dynamics, cutting crime and the fear around it, and while growing the organization. But that growth faces a big hurdle right away: staffing.
Oh, absolutely. That's probably the biggest immediate challenge. The Bureau has fewer sworn officers now than they've had in, what, 35 years?
Wow, 35 years.
Yeah. So they just can't hire patrol officers quickly enough to keep up.
Which makes the budget details really interesting. For fiscal year 24-25, the budget was $282.4 million. And there was this extra $5 million, a one-time thing just to boost the overtime budget. Took it from $17.5 million up to $22.5 million.
All right, and that $5 million tells a story. It basically says, we can't hire fast enough. So they're paying existing officers more overtime to cover essential missions, investigations. It's a stopgap, really.
Burning out the current staff to plug the holes.
Pretty much. It buys them some breathing room until hopefully 2025. They're expecting about 100 officers currently in training to be ready then.
So they need efficiency now, which
Right.
probably explains the push to expand the PS3 program, the Public Safety Support Specialist.
Exactly. The PS3s. You can think of them as handling the calls that don't strictly need a sworn officer with a gun, like property damage reports, some welfare checks, things Portland Street Response maybe can't handle solo.
Okay, so freeing up patrol officers for more serious stuff.
That's the idea. Let the expensive, highly trained officers focus on violent crime, complex cases.
And what about data? They're talking about evidence-based policing, implementing this PAN-D model in 2025.
Yeah, PAN-D. Problem scan, analyze problem, nominate strategy, deploy strategy, assess outcomes. What's interesting there is the structure it imposes. It forces a shift from just reacting to, actually stopping and asking, did what we just did work? Before pouring more resources in.
A bit more deliberate.
Definitely. And then, of course, the big accountability piece.
Yeah.
Body-worn cameras. They finished rolling those out citywide in September 2024.
Okay, so that's the strategy, the resources, the challenges. Did it actually make a difference in the 2024 crime stats?
In some key areas, yes. There were some positive trends compared to the year before. Overall person crimes reported, down 4%. Property crimes, down 12%. Homicides are also down 8%.
And vehicle theft, that was a big one, down 34%. Lowest since 2016, I read. That seems like a clear success.
It really does. And reported shootings dropped 22%, which sounds great, and it is an improvement.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
Well, yeah, you have to remember the context. Even with that 22% drop, the number of shootings is still roughly double what it was back in, say, 2019. The baseline shifted way up during the pandemic years.
Right, right. Better, but still way higher than pre-pandemic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not everything went down. Aggravated assault actually went up 2%. Kidnapping abduction up 9%. And the one that really pops out is shoplifting. Reports were up 50%.
50%, wow. How much of that is real versus just better reporting, though?
That's the million-dollar question. The report itself flags that improved online reporting systems likely contributed. Businesses might just be reporting more consistently now.
So maybe the actual increase wasn't 50%, but it's hard to know for sure. Still, it's obviously a problem.
Oh, for sure. Even if reporting is easier, almost 1,000 arrests related to retail theft by November 2024 tells you it's a major visible issue. They're running specific retail theft missions, partly funded by a grant, about $474,000 to try and tackle it.
Okay, so that covers property and violent crime trends, but what about the drug situation? The overdose numbers were slightly down, but the seizure data, it's kind of mind-blowing.
It is genuinely staggering. You're right. Overdose deaths reported at PPB dipped a bit in 2024, 274 compared to 301 the year before. But the amount of drugs the narcotics and organized crime unit seized, it's just exploded.
I mean, read these numbers again. Crack cocaine seizures up 29,000%, and fentanyl up over 500%.
By weight, you read that right. 29,286% for crack, over 500% for fentanyl grams. It's not just a trend. It suggests a whole new level of supply flooding the city. Fentanyl and meth are still the main drugs they see in possession arrests downtown.
Does the report give any clue why? Where's all this coming from so suddenly?
It focuses more on the police response, the missions, the seizures, not so much the ultimate source. But those numbers imply a massive sustained influx. They're basically running missions constantly just to try and keep pace.
You can sort of see that reflected in the crime maps, right? Where are the hot spots?
Yeah, the geography tells a story. Downtown Portland lights up bright red for assault incidents. The 82nd Avenue corridor is another known high crime area. Around 82nd and Sandy specifically is noted for prostitution.
But it's localized too.
Very much so. If you look at the safest spots for assault in 2023, it was way over in the Southwest. Marshall Park had just one incident all year. Markham had two. So policing really has to be targeted, almost block by block.
Which brings us back to those missions, the stolen vehicle operations, the SVOs. That 34% drop we talked about, you said it was tied to the missions.
Directly, they credit the consistency of those SVOs. They've recovered, 474 stolen vehicles in 53 missions since 2022. They work.
But they cost money. About $17,000 per mission.
Yeah, around that. And here's the catch. They're funded mostly by a federal grant, a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant. That grant runs through most of fiscal year 26.
So the big success story we're seeing in vehicle theft reduction is basically dependent on external grant funding for the overtime it requires.
That's the reality. If that grant money dries up, those targeted missions likely stop or scale back significantly, and you'd expect thefts to probably climb again. It's effective, but it's precarious.
Okay. Then you have the really high-profile stuff, like shutting down street racing takeovers. Those sound expensive.
Extremely. They mentioned one, the West Coast Invitational mission, ran over 3 days, cost $232,000 just in overtime.
Wow. What did they get for nearly $250,000?
184 traffic stops, 29 arrests. But look, the cost reflects the complexity and the risk. These events are dangerous. They rely heavily on the air support unit, the helicopter, to track cars safely from above. Chasing these guys on the ground is just too risky.
So the helicopter, even though it costs, about $320 an hour to operate, actually saves money and lives in the long run by preventing pursuit.
That's the rationale, yes. It avoids potentially catastrophic crashes and the lawsuits that follow.
And then there are the more routine, directed patrols, targeting things like prostitution or drug dealing based on community complaints.
Right. Central Precinct runs narcotics missions maybe 3 times a month, costing around $3,150 each. The North NRT unit averaged about 54 arrests a month, mostly warrants, shoplifting, stuff like that.
But there's a trade-off there too, right? If you pull patrol officers for these special missions, then regular 911 call response times can go up elsewhere. It's a constant balancing act with limited resources. Central Precinct is also trying to balance enforcement with deflection efforts, partnering with a behavioral health unit to offer treatment or housing options instead of arrest for people caught with small amounts of drugs. Okay, so that's the picture on the crime front. Missions, stats, challenges. Now let's shift gears completely, because overshadowing all this daily activity are these massive long-term risks. Portland's seismic hazard situation is unique.
It really is. It's this dual threat. First, you have the big one, the Cascadia subduction zone offshore. Scientists expect a magnitude 9 earthquake sometime in the next 50 years or so.
5 to 7 minutes of shaking. That's just terrifying to imagine.
It is. But because the fault is about 50 miles offshore, people in Portland might actually get maybe up to a minute of warning between the initial waves hitting the coast and the strong shaking reaching the city. A minute isn't much, but it's something.
Okay, but that's not the only threat.
No. There are also local crustal faults, like the Portland Hills Fault, which runs right under downtown. An earthquake on one of those would be different. Shorter, much more intense shaking, and basically zero warning time, just bang.
And the city's buildings aren't ready, particularly the old ones, the URM's unreinforced masonry.
Yeah, that's a huge vulnerability.
Yeah.
Over 1,600 URM buildings in Portland. Less than 20% have had seismic upgrades. And think about the bridges over the Willamette. 10 out of the 12 were built before 1994, before modern seismic standards. They're at high risk. Only the Burnside Bridge is actually scheduled for retrofit starting in 2025.
It's almost impossible to picture the scale of damage.
And it gets worse, because after the shaking stops, that's when the chemical plumes could start. This is the post-quake nightmare scenario.
Explain that. Chemical plumes.
Multnomah County has around 1,100 industrial sites that store significant amounts of hazardous chemicals. They're called Tier 2 facilities. We're talking things like hydrochloric acid, sulfur dioxide, and hydrous ammonia, nasty stuff.
And where are these facilities located?
The highest risk ones, the top 70. They're clustered right along the Willamette and Columbia rivers on liquefiable soil. Soil that basically turns to soup during intense shaking.
So the tanks rupture, the chemicals mix.
Exactly. The worst case modeling, assuming a near windless summer day when vapors hang in the air, predicts up to 2,500 deaths and 17,000 injuries in Multnomah County, just from the chemical releases.
Wait, 2,500 deaths after the earthquake from chemicals? Not from collapsing buildings.
That's the projection, yes. It fundamentally changes what emergency response looks like. You're not just pulling people from rubble. You're dealing with a massive toxic event simultaneously.
And this includes the fuel hub, the CEI hub.
Yes, the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. It handles 90% of Oregon's liquid fuel, and 91% of its big storage tanks were built before 1993 seismic codes. They estimate anywhere from 95 million to 194 million gallons of petroleum could be released. It would be an environmental catastrophe on top of everything else.
And there's an equity angle here too, isn't there? Where these facilities are located?
Absolutely. The county's emergency management director pointed out that historically, the land near these industrial zones was cheaper. So the neighborhoods most at risk, like St. John's and North Portland, have higher poverty rates. St. John's poverty rate is 22% compared to about 12% for the county overall. The people with the fewest resources are living right next to the biggest post-quake threat.
That's sobering. Okay, the earthquake is the monster scenario. But there's another natural hazard Portland deals with more regularly, especially around its parks and forested areas. Wildfires. What's the advice there?
Yeah, that's a much more frequent, if less catastrophic risk. For homeowners, survival often comes down to the house itself and the space around it. The roof is usually the most vulnerable part. Non-flammable materials are key metal, concrete tiles, that sort of thing.
Siding, too.
Yep. Stucco or masonry is best. If you have wood or vinyl, putting fire-rated gypsum board behind it helps. But the big thing anyone can do is create defensible space, clearing flammable stuff away from the house, pruning tree branches so they aren't overhanging the roof or touching walls, keep at least 10 feet clear, and break up dense vegetation, have gaps between clusters of plants so fire can't just leap easily from one to the next. Basic landscape maintenance, really.
Okay. So, wrapping this all up, we've looked at crime fighting, these targeted missions, the budget realities, and then we looked at these huge, looming natural and industrial disaster risks. What's the takeaway?
Well, the data suggests that police are making some real headway on specific, visible crimes through these intensive, often overtime-funded missions, like we saw with car thefts.
Right.
There's measurable progress there.
Right.
But that progress on the immediate problem seems almost dwarfed by the sheer scale of the city's vulnerability to a major earthquake and the chemical disaster likely to follow. That success relies on temporary funding, while the infrastructure needed to survive Cascadia, the bridges, the fuel tanks, retrofitting those URMs remains massively underfunded and largely unaddressed after decades.
So the police are managing the crisis they can see and touch, the day-to-day stuff. But the bigger, predictable crisis, the one we know is coming, isn't getting the same level of concrete action or investment.
Which leads to the question we really want to leave you, the listener, with. Think about this. We have incredibly detailed reports outlining exactly which industrial facilities are most vulnerable, sitting on soil that will liquefy, posing a known risk of catastrophic chemical release after an earthquake. We have detailed city emergency plans on the shelf. So what kind of investment, what kind of civic priority truly balances fighting today's crime, those necessary but costly missions, with the fundamental long-term duty to protect thousands of lives from this entirely predictable, high-casualty seismic and environmental disaster? Where should the balance really lie? Something to think about.